rolling, sound quiet. Here we go. Reading. 1.67. And starting right and action.
Hi, everyone. Chad Matthews coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas with the Lone Star Film Festival. This is day number 5. It's our final day of movies, so make sure to check out as many films as possible through midnight. There's a lot to choose from. And if you're kind of thinking, well, what should I watch? Maybe this film talk is going to push you to a wonderful documentary that you should certainly check out. It's called Words Can't Go There. Sorry, I had to look at my notes. Words Can't Go There. And it's directed and written by David Neptune, which is on the line with us right now. Hi, David. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chad. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this last minute. I mean, we really kind of just coordinated this within the last hour. So we appreciate you, taking a break on your Sunday to join us. So before we begin and get into the meat of the documentary, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background as a filmmaker and an artist, and your path to getting to making movies like this one.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I began sort of in photography when I was in high school. I was really into the black and white photography, and I was born and raised in Japan, but came to the States at 15, and that's when I kind of started doing photography. And after that, I went to film school and started doing a lot of YouTube comedy videos, actually. And so you may have heard of a couple of them. One was called What Kind of Asian Are You? Another one was called But We're Speaking Japanese. And so because of my Japanese language skills, I was doing a lot of comedy type stuff where it's like American culture, Japanese culture, not quite meeting eye to eye. And so after doing a lot of that, my writing partner was kind of coming up with a lot of the ideas. So I felt that I really wanted to create something that was my own. And when I thought about what that might be, the story that really inspired me growing up is my dad's story. This Caucasian American surfer dude goes to Japan in the 70s to further his studies of this Japanese bamboo flute called the shakuhachi, and somehow ends up staying there and becoming a great master of this flute. And so now he's relatively well known in that world and is well respected by the traditional Japanese, masters and all of that as well. So that was really kind of my intro into documentary world. And now as a filmmaker, I really work in a lot of documentary series. So I just worked on the show on Netflix called Street Food as a story producer. Mm-hmm. And I also did a show for Fox Sports called Truth Be Told, Rick and Keel. That was a really great one. And then just finished up a show called Marvel 616, which is coming out on Disney Plus on November 20th. So a lot of story producing and basically sort of helping people in series, see the arc of each episode of a show, and editing interviews to create that sort of arc is what I've been doing.
Very cool. So yeah. This is a family story. I mean, this is a story about your dad. You move away, you start becoming a filmmaker. At what point in your career, your life, did you think, I need to tell this story, this family, this personal story? Was it immediately when you started getting into film, or did it take some time? And then did you have to convince your father to go with it?
Well, I would say it took a little bit of time to get into it. I started just thinking over what sort of projects I would like to do. And I guess my family has always been sort of a source of inspiration for me. In particular, my dad, who really sort of trailblazed this path for himself and did something that, no one in his family had done. His family lived in San Diego. He grew up in San Diego, California. And it really was just this flute that took him to Japan. It wasn't like he was really interested in Japan and went there. He just really wanted to be a great player of this instrument. So it was a very unique, I think, in for him. And I think that attitude of just following your passion, following your bliss, it was just so clear to me, even as a young kid, because even taking a step back from San Diego, he went to Hawaii because he's a surfer and wanted to surf the best waves in the world. And so he went to the University of Hawaii and just ended up discovering this flute. So it was all kind of these coincidences, stacked up that led to him becoming a great artist. And I always really admired his focus and determination to just make it work. So it always was kind of in the back of my head, but I always thought, oh, I'm not really a documentary filmmaker, though. I had done a lot of narrative stuff up until that point. So that was kind of what led to it.
I mean, he is such a fascinating subject. I mean, he's the movie, if you haven't seen it yet, it follows his, his education in Japan with this instrument, and then how he revolutionized this art form. And I think it's amazing that he's a master of not only the instrument, but then in the manufacturing of the instrument. And then when he went to India and did all this stuff with drums, like, what do you think your father is best at? What is his strongest mastery?
Well, I think his greatest skill is just his determination and his focus and his drive, and he's a genius of effort, essentially. So whatever it is that he does, and he's always taught me this since I was a kid, just put 100% into it. Put more than 100%. Just put everything you've got and more into whatever it is that you really want to do, and some path will open up. It might not be the path that you set out on, but other doors will open and it'll take you in that direction. And that's really what kind of led to him also crafting the instrument, because he was starting to recognize, taking a step back also, I think, he really took this sort of Western way of thinking about music and composition into this traditional flute that was really more like a teacher would play something and say, do it like this. And the student would try, but not quite get it right. And all right, come back next week and try harder. There wasn't a lot of like practice pieces or scales and that sort of thing to like just improve technique. And so he said, well, that's odd. I can improve my technique a lot if I use those things. So he did just that and kind of applied himself really deeply into the practice of it, practicing 10 hours a day, some days. And he just discovered that there were some flutes that played better than others in his daily practice, and he didn't understand why. So he started tinkering with the tuning of these flutes. And that's what really led to him crafting the instruments himself, because he was just sort of puzzled by why, this very simple flute with only 4 holes in the front, 1 in the back, but there's half holing and quarter holing and just opening just a tiny bit of a hole to get different scales. He can play, Western classical, he can play jazz, he plays, traditional Indian ragas and that sort of thing. So he goes into it all. And yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Now, do you play?
Actually, no. People always ask me that, but I never felt like it because he's just so good at it. I just knew that, I'm always going to be compared to him, and I kind of wanted to do my own thing that I could make a name for myself in, and so filmmaking was kind of the thing for me.
So in the film, and you touch on this, your father is a musician. He's traveling, he's on the road a lot, and he was gone for a lot of your childhood. Was that something that really affected you? I mean, because you touch on it, but you're the director, you're behind the camera. We don't know your story, but what was your take on your dad being on the road and being gone? I mean, we heard what your mom had to say about it, but what was your feelings on it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And having me, in the film or not, how much of me in the film makes sense was like a very endless pursuit. That was a question that me and the producers constantly went back and forth with. And what kind of ended up being the conclusion of why I'm not in the film as much is that I actually had a pretty good, I always had a good relationship with my dad, and didn't really feel like he was gone, that much per se, because he really focused on spending time with us when he was there. And so I actually felt, quite loved and, connected with my dad, and really appreciated that about him. But it wasn't until, later when I became an adult that I realized there was this rift between my parents. And so that was kind of almost like a Pandora's box that sort of just showed me a different side of being an artist, and this like focus and dedication that he had. and it was a hard one to swallow for me, but it was also something that I felt eventually. I had to be convinced. I didn't want to go into the painful family stuff, but as I'm making the film, realizing that, yeah, my dad really is this like zenned out happy guy that's basically never bothered by anything. How am I going to create conflict in this story? If there's no tension, if there's nothing to get resolved, then this is not going to be an interesting story. And when I really thought about it, that was kind of the place. And my amazing DP Bennett, as well as my producers Chiaki and Mike, really sort of helped push me in that direction, so I could ask the tough questions and get into that stuff. But yeah, to answer your question, I felt like I really was pretty connected with my dad, growing up.
I think you really made the right choice. I mean, you're in it briefly, but not having you as the subject, kind of interviewing. It's the story's about your dad, and that takes the forefront, and that makes it so much more powerful. There was a little moment there where your father gets a little emotional. What do you think that was from?
Oh man, I think there were a lot of things, and there were a couple moments. One was when we were sort of walking in the bamboo forest behind our house, and that scene was actually total magic because it was after we had done a very early screening of the film in Japan, and so he was finally sort of completely let his guard down and was totally relaxed because he, was I think a little. He's a performer, so he always has this mask when he's on camera, but when we finished that screening, he finally just relaxed, and it was just me and a camera, and I just kind of followed him and said, "You want to go take a look at the bamboo forest up behind the house that we used to clean up and make look really nice?" And because he would actually harvest the bamboo there to make these amazing big drums that are made out of bamboo, and so we did that, and it turned out to be a really poignant scene in the film because I realized, oh, I have some archival footage of him and I walking in that forest when I'm a kid, and now it's quite disheveled. A lot of bamboo has like fallen over, and there's these crisscross of this sort of brown, sort of dark feeling, bamboo. And so after that walk with him, he sat down, and I just started asking him a little bit about like, so what did you think about the stuff I touch on in the film about family and this and that, and he had a couple moments there. I think for him, and the line that really sticks with me is there's a long pause, and he says, "No regrets." And I feel like that line is kind of, there's a lot of truth to it. And there's also, I think, a sense for him where, maybe I could have done things a little bit differently, at least with my mom, and maybe there could have been another way to maybe spend a little more time with her, so that there wasn't this rift. And, yet he also really focused on his music so that he could provide for his family,
Right.
i.e. myself and my sister and my mom. So, and that at the same time, no regrets. So it was kind of, I think it was a really mixture, sort of a little tornado of emotion that was happening in some of those moments.
I think all artists really do struggle with that. I mean, in order to create really great art, you have to really throw yourself into it. And sometimes, your family is on the side. And it's not that you don't love the family. It's just you have to do this because it's just part of your DNA. And your dad very much had that passion. So the family home, is that still where they reside, or because I like the landscape of it. I mean, I love the bamboo forest that they're in. I mean, it's super cool. And you grew up there.
I grew up there. Yeah. It's an amazing place. It's absolutely amazing. It's so lush and green. He does still live there. And it's like, he has to constantly fight back nature from overtaking the house because it's just so alive and it's just constantly growing all around it. So it's fantastic there. It's such a beautiful, it's like a Miyazaki film, it's like you step right into Spirited Away or something like that, or it just, that's exactly what it's like. All rice fields and bamboo all around. And that was the reason he chose the town that I grew up in, is because he wanted to be able to harvest bamboo to make the flutes, and also be close to the coast where he could surf. So, that's where Kamogawa, which translates to Duck River, in Japan, is, and it's in Chiba Prefecture next to Tokyo. Kind of the big peninsula next to Tokyo is called Chiba. So
Okay.
that's where he is still now.
And how would you categorize like your growing up in Japan? I mean, what was your impression of it?
Well, I mean, it was definitely a really blessed. I had a blessed childhood for sure.
Sure.
Like being so surrounded by nature, and I was always riding my mountain bike to go fishing and lakes and rivers and bass fishing and that kind of thing, and surfing with my dad and mountain biking, and um, it was fantastic. And at the same time, being a totally Caucasian kid in the countryside of Japan, growing up, going to public elementary school was definitely a interesting experience, and something that as an American guy, who does not look Japanese at all, but was born in Japan and essentially had a very similar upbringing to all the kids in school. It was hard to feel like I fit in because I was always treated differently, and oh, he's the exception.
Mhm.
And that's an experience I think that foreigners in Japan in general have a lot. And I'm glad that I was able to touch on that just a little bit, with the film. But my experience in some ways was maybe more extreme because I was born there, and I technically wasn't even a Japanese citizen because they don't grant citizenship to someone unless they have a Japanese parent. So I sort of defaulted to being American essentially in
Huh.
citizenship. But it's hard to feel like part of the pack, when you're constantly reminded of how different you are.
Even after
So that
growing
was,
up there for that many years, you still feel as an outsider.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for
Wow.
sure. And the people I'm closest to don't, treat me that way, and speak to me that way. And but it's just, as a kid and growing up in the 80s in Japan, it was like, I mean, people would just like stare at me in the street, just like, oh wow, there's a white dude, that kind of thing. And so it was very bizarre because I felt like I was everyone else. I spoke Japanese just like everyone else and could read and write, and I loved. I mean, that's all I knew. I came to America and it felt like a foreign country.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Visiting my grandparents and things. So it was the weirdest experience moving to the U.S. when I was 15 and feeling like, oh wow, here I'm in a foreign country, but everybody is treating me like I'm one of them all of a sudden. So it was this very bizarre. It was like I was getting everything I wanted my entire life growing up, yet it felt so abnormal and unnatural, because I was like, oh, I'm not like you guys, but yeah, cool, man. It was
I
a very
thought
bizarre
it,
experience.
it was really interesting because you watch the documentary and you see all these clips of your dad on these TV shows and these concerts, and he seems like a superstar, and yet he still felt like an outsider in Japan. I just think that's really interesting. Um,
Yeah, and I think for him too, it was slightly different. It's really interesting because I think he moved there after he sort of already established himself, as a young man in the US. So it didn't really matter if he was accepted or not. He also, I think, didn't care about that as much because he was an adult and already, confident and sure of who he was and what his mission was and everything. So he was just doing his thing. And if people accepted him, great. And if not, that's fine too. So that's kind of the attitude he took to everything.
yeah. Um, we were talking a little bit earlier about him, being on the road and the struggle with balancing a creative life and family. And there was a mention of financial struggle. Now, was there
Mm.
a financial struggle, or was it just him working was the struggle, and it had to do with making money? It wasn't that you ever were financially struggling. Is that am I interpreting that right? Or
I think, yeah, I think that moment in the film it was probably a pretty brief period where he and my mom were teaching English to make ends meet, and it wasn't. I think there wasn't necessarily like a deep financial struggle, but it
okay,
was um, y- a struggle in the sense that all of us artists, go through, which is, how do we make our passion also the way that we make our living? And he, I think, was able to do that actually really quickly. Um, I think just because he was such a prodigy in a lot of ways. You know, he just took
Yeah.
it so much further than other people had taken the instrument. So
Very cool. So tell me about where the film goes from here. I mean, is it going to play more festivals? Do you have distribution lined up? What do you hope
yes.
for it?
So a pretty clear path forward here right now. We're playing at the Valley Film Festival in LA. We're actually having a drive-in theater screening in Van Nuys, which I'm
Cool.
very excited about. And that's happening on the 15th here in LA at 6:30 in the evening. And then on the 20th, just 5 days later, we are actually releasing it on all the VOD platforms. So you'll be able to find it on iTunes and Google and Amazon at that point. So that's kind of that's our way forward. This is the tail end of our festival experience this year.
Well, we certainly appreciate you considering us and allowing us to screen it with the Lone Star Film Festival. It's a great piece, and again, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend checking it out today. Today's the last day to watch it. What can we look forward with you, David? Do you have anything else coming up, like anything that you're working on right now that we can look forward to in the upcoming months or years?
Well, in very, very early stages right now, I'd like to do kind of similar to what David Gelb did with creating Jiro Dreams of Sushi and then creating Chef's Table. I'm really hoping to create a docu-series that takes a lot of the topics I covered in this film and make a global scale sort of series where it would be a musician in a different country for each episode and about their traditions and how they innovate but also preserve, and how they provide for their families, and just kind of getting that that angle, that into their culture through music, I think would be really cool. So that's my next big project, hopefully. And I've also got a feature film that I may become involved with, but we'll see. I'll keep that one hidden for now.
Okay. All right. Well, think of us, and hopefully we can do a screening one day in person and have you in Fort Worth. Again, thank you for submitting your film and being a part of the festival. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Chad. This has been great. And, you guys are awesome. So I'm so pleased that my film is, playing with you guys. And yeah, I really look forward to coming and meeting you guys in person, hopefully soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Chad.